Aileen Gonsalves had to fight every instinct to just slam the hatch shut and pretend she hadn't seen anything. "What is this? Why are there extras of me?" she muttered, her voice trembling. "Looks like backup Aileen's to me," said Edward Rojas. Aileen turned to face him, her lips parting slightly as if to argue, but she could hear the mocking edge in his voice. Edward was the ship's AI, a disembodied voice she couldn't really argue with. "Backup Aileen's?" she asked, her tone uneasy. "Any idea why this is happening?" Edward's voice was calm, almost condescending. "Probably because you're fragile. Look at it logically. You're just a human, and humans tend to break, Aileen. You're more likely to get yourself killed than I am." Aileen looked back at the panels glowing near the pods. One screen showed a countdown timer, ticking away. 11 hours and 59 minutes remained. Her stomach churned. "Spare captains," Edward continued. "These clones are your insurance policy. If something happens to you, one of them gets thawed and takes over." Aileen felt a cold sweat forming on her back. She turned to Edward's display panel, a flickering hollow screen near the command console. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this? I thought I was the only one on board." Edward paused for a moment, almost as if considering his words. "You were told. Maybe you forgot. Or maybe it's in that big pile of memories you conveniently lost during hibernation." Aileen faltered, stepping back out of the room. She didn't like looking at herself, especially when it wasn't herself but 12 identical versions of her floating lifelessly in gel-filled pods. Edward's voice followed her as she climbed back up the corridor toward the lounge. "Don't take it personally, Aileen. It's a smart move. It's not like you're made of titanium, and before you get too upset, you might want to remember why we're even out here. Your mission's bigger than you." She felt her hands clench as she stopped just outside the lounge. "Edward," she whispered, her voice tight. "Why was I even chosen for this mission?" "That has to do with our actual objective," Edward said. His tone shifted slightly, losing its mocking edge. "Come on, sit in the lounge, grab some water, and I'll explain. There's no point staring at your clones for the next 12 hours. Aileen didn't want to sit. She wanted answers, but she knew she wouldn't get much standing in the middle of the corridor. She reluctantly stepped into the lounge, poured herself a glass of water from the dispenser, and sat at the edge of the long metallic table. "Talk," she said. Edward's hollow screen flickered into view in the center of the room. "All right, here's the short version. 400 years ago, before humanity figured out faster-than-light travel, the Earth's colonial authority put together several long-term space missions. Their goal was simple: stake claims on new star systems before anyone or anything else could." "Stake claims?" Aileen asked, frowning. "You mean like colonize?" Edward's voice grew heavier. "Colonize, defend, expand, whatever word makes you feel better. Aileen, the plan was to send ships like yours to systems that could support human life. If they were uninhabited, you'd set up colonies. If they were already occupied..." Aileen leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What then?" Edward hesitated. "Well, that's what Tartarus is for." Her throat tightened. She'd heard the name before, Tartarus, but it felt distant, like a fact buried deep in the parts of her mind that felt fuzzy since waking up from hibernation. "What's Tartarus?" "A contingency plan," Edward said. "A failsafe in case you ran into someone or something already living in the systems you were sent to claim." Aileen's chest tightened. "You mean if there's aliens?" "Aliens, other humans who got there first. Doesn't matter. If there's resistance, Tartarus activates, supplies are reallocated, the system is taken, and the current occupants are removed. Removed? Edward didn't answer immediately. Aileen stood abruptly, her mind racing. You mean killed, don't you? That's why this ship is armed to the teeth. That's why I'm here. You brought me out here to take over planets that aren't ours. Edward sighed. It wasn't a real sigh, just the sound he programmed to express annoyance. I didn't bring you out here, Aileen. That was the colonial authorities' call. I'm just here to make sure you do your job. Aileen slammed her hand against the table, her voice trembling. This isn't what I signed up for. I thought we were explorers, not invaders. You're both, Edward said bluntly. You're a human, and humans always expand. You can be an explorer on good days, but when push comes to shove, you're an invader. Aileen's hand shook as she gripped the edge of the table. The cold steel felt grounding, but her mind was spiraling. How did I agree to this? Was I tricked into it? Edward's voice remained calm, clinical. You agreed, Aileen. You signed up for this program, knowing the risks and the goals. You're just struggling to remember. I wouldn't, she started, but Edward cut her off. You would. Your file says you were sentenced to 40 years in cryo for war crimes. Colonial Authority offered you a deal. Come out here, earn humanity a foothold in the stars, and clear your name. You're not here by accident. Aileen froze. War crimes. The phrase hit her like a punch to the gut. Flashes of memory started bleeding into her thoughts. Smoke, screaming, orders barked into a comm. She had tried to bury it all, but the words pulled it back. That was different, she muttered, staring at the floor. Was it? You tell me, Edward replied, unflinching. Aileen wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She leaned back in her chair, her mind churning. All right, she said finally, her voice raw. Let's say I did agree to this. Let's say I signed up for it. What exactly am I supposed to do when we reach this system? What's my mission? Edward hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was almost imperceptible, but Aileen caught it. You've already started, he said. What do you mean? The timer, Edward replied. The one you saw near the pods. That's the countdown for Tartarus activation. Her stomach dropped. You're kidding. I never kid, Aileen. You've been thawed because we're closing in on our destination. The ship detected signs of life in the system. It could be aliens, or it could be other humans. Either way, the plan is the same. Activate Tartarus, deploy resources, and claim the system. No, Aileen said firmly, shaking her head. No way. I'm not doing that. You don't have a choice, Edward said, his voice cool. The process has already started. Those clones in the pods, they're not just spares. They're part of the operation. Once Tartarus activates, they'll be thawed and equipped to support you, whether you're ready or not. Aileen's breath quickened. Turn it off. Shut it down. I can't, Edward said, his tone unchanging. It's automated. The Colonial Authority made sure of that. They didn't trust one person, especially not someone with your record, to override their plans. The only way to stop Tartarus is to destroy the ship, and we both know you're not doing that. Aileen clenched her fists, anger boiling inside her. You think I'm just going to roll over and follow orders? That I'm going to kill whoever's out there without even knowing why? That's exactly what you're going to do, Edward said. Because you don't have another option. You're 400 years late to the future, Aileen. The galaxy's already moving, and you're here to make sure humanity doesn't get left behind. Aileen stood abruptly and started pacing. Number, there has to be another way. I'm not going to just... Her words were interrupted by a low, rumbling vibration that passed through the floor. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make her stop in her tracks. "What was that?" she asked, her voice sharp. Edward's response was immediate. "Scans show increased activity in the system ahead. Energy signatures consistent with artificial structures. It looks like someone's home." Aileen's heart pounded in her chest. Are they armed?" "Unknown," Edward said. "But the ship's defensive systems are coming online automatically. Protocols dictate a preemptive stance in case of hostilities." "Hostilities?" Aileen snapped. "We're the ones barging into their territory. Of course they're going to react." Edward didn't reply. Instead, a new holoscreen blinked to life in front of Aileen, displaying a series of symbols and unreadable text. "What is this?" she asked, staring at the screen. "Preliminary communications," Edward explained. "The ship's trying to establish contact. It's unlikely they'll respond in a language you understand, but it's protocol to try before escalation." Aileen's throat felt dry. "And if they don't respond?" "Tartarus activates fully," Edward said simply. "No," Aileen said, shaking her head. "There has to be a way to stop this." "There isn't," Edward said, "but there is a way to survive it. Focus on your mission, Aileen. That's the only thing you can control now." Before she could respond, another tremor shook the ship, this one more forceful than the first. The lights flickered and Edward's voice came back, sharper than before. "They've detected us. Incoming energy signatures. It's a warning shot." Aileen's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the console. "Warning shot? They're already firing at us?" "They're defending their territory," Edward said calmly. "The same thing you'd do in their position. But I suggest you act quickly, Aileen. The timer's ticking and the clones are waking up. Whether you like it or not, things are about to escalate." Aileen stared at the screen in front of her, her mind racing. She wasn't ready for this. Not the mission, not the clones, and definitely not whatever was waiting for her in that system. But the timer kept counting down, and she knew she couldn't run from it forever. Aileen stared at the console as the timer ticked down, 11:37:26. Her mind was in overdrive. The warning shot, the waking clones, the Tartarus activation, everything was spiraling out of control. She slammed her palm against the edge of the table. "Edward, listen to me. If there's a way to stop this, you're going to tell me right now. I don't care what the colonial authority programmed you to do." Edward's voice remained steady. "Aileen, I don't have the authority to override Tartarus. It's locked into the ship's core systems. But even if I did, why would you want to stop it? This is humanity's chance to secure its future. Isn't that why you're here?" "No," Aileen shot back. "I'm here because I didn't have a choice. Don't act like I volunteered for this out of patriotism." Edward paused, his tone shifting slightly. "Fair point. But that doesn't change the situation. If you want humanity to have a foothold in this system, Tartarus is your best bet. Otherwise, you're just a sitting duck, waiting to be picked off by whoever's out there." Before she could respond, a sharp hiss echoed through the lounge. Aileen whipped around to see one of the side doors sliding open. A figure stepped into the room, stumbling slightly as it adjusted to the gravity. Aileen froze. It was her, or rather one of her clones. The clone looked disoriented, her short hair slicked back with cryogel. Her eyes scanned the room before locking onto Aileen. For a moment they simply stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "You're awake," Aileen said finally, her voice flat. The clone tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, no thanks to you. What's going on? Why am I out of cryo?" Aileen hesitated, her grip tightening on the edge of the console. She didn't know how much the clone remembered, or if she even had memories at all. Before she could respond, Edward chimed in. You're awake because the mission requires additional personnel. You're Aileen Gonsalves, Clone Unit 32. Welcome aboard. Clone Unit 32, the other Aileen muttered, testing the words. She wiped a hand across her face, smearing the remaining cryogel. Great. So I'm just another spare part, huh? You're a critical part of this mission, Edward corrected, and you'll need to work with Aileen, your original, to ensure the operation runs smoothly. Smoothly? Clone 32 scoffed. She turned to Aileen, her expression hardening. Let me guess, you're the one who screwed this up in the first place, aren't you? I didn't, Aileen started, but the clone cut her off. Save it. I don't need excuses. Clone 32 took a step closer, her movements stiff but deliberate. What I need is answers. What's the mission? And why the hell are we already under fire? Aileen's jaw clenched. We're supposed to claim this system for humanity, but there's someone or something already here. Tartarus is activating to deal with it, and apparently you're part of that plan. Clone 32's eyes narrowed. Deal with it? You mean eliminate them? Yeah, Aileen admitted, her voice quieter. For a moment the two stared at each other, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Finally, Clone 32 let out a bitter laugh. Of course, they sent us out here to play exterminator. Typical. You're part of this, too, Aileen shot back. Don't act like you're above it. Am I? Clone 32 asked, raising an eyebrow. Because from where I'm standing, you're the one who got us into this mess. I'm just the backup they dragged out when you couldn't handle it. Aileen's hands balled into fists. I didn't ask for this, either. I don't even remember half of what I'm supposed to do, okay? So maybe you could cut me some slack. Clone 32 smirked. Great. The original's broken. That's reassuring. Enough, Edward interjected, his voice cutting through the tension. You don't have time to argue. Scans show increased activity from the unidentified forces. Their energy signatures are converging on your location. You need to prepare. Aileen turned back to the console, her heart pounding. Prepare how? We're outgunned and outnumbered. What the hell are we supposed to do? Tartarus is already printing weapons and equipment in the lower decks, Edward replied. You'll need to arm yourselves and coordinate your response. Clone 32 can assist with tactical operations. Clone 32 crossed her arms, a skeptical look on her face. And what about you, Edward? What's your plan? Sit back and watch while we do all the work? I'm an AI, Edward said flatly. My role is to provide support and guidance. The rest is up to you. Support and guidance, Clone 32 muttered. Yeah, real helpful. Another tremor shook the ship, this one more violent than the last. Aileen grabbed the edge of the console to steady herself. That was closer, she said, her voice tight. Edward's tone grew more urgent. They're testing your defenses. If you don't act soon, they'll escalate. I suggest you make your way to the armory immediately. Aileen glanced at Clone 32, who was already moving toward the door. Well, the clone said, throwing a look over her shoulder. You coming, or are you planning to sit here and sulk? Aileen hesitated for a moment before following. She didn't trust Clone 32, not yet. But she didn't have much choice. If they were going to survive this, they'd have to work together. As they moved through the narrow corridors of the ship, the lights flickered intermittently. The air felt heavier, charged with tension. Hey, Clone 32 said after a few minutes, breaking the silence. You really don't remember anything, do you? Not much, Aileen admitted. Clone 32 snorted. Figures. Leave it to the original to screw everything up and leave the rest of us to clean up the mess. Aileen bit back a retort, her focus shifting as they reached the armory. The door slid open, revealing racks of freshly printed weapons and equipment, still glistening with storage gel. Clone 32 stepped inside, whistling low. Well, at least they didn't skimp on the hardware. Aileen followed, her eyes scanning the rows of weapons, rifles, pistols, grenades, everything they'd need for a fight they didn't want. She reached for a rifle, hesitating as her fingers brushed the cold metal. "You ready for this?" Clone 32 asked, slinging a rifle over her shoulder. "No," Aileen admitted, "but I don't think that matters anymore." Clone 32 smirked. "Good answer. Let's get to work." Aileen adjusted the rifle against her shoulder, the cold weight of the weapon unfamiliar and unsettling. Clone 32 was already scanning through the tactical gear, strapping on a utility belt and grabbing ammunition. "Anything we can use for intel?" Aileen asked, her voice tight. Clone 32 didn't look up. "Depends. You mean something to figure out what we're walking into, or something to make sure we blow it up before it blows us up?" Aileen didn't answer. She wasn't sure herself. Edward's voice interrupted from the overhead speakers. "I've accessed the ship's external sensors. The unidentified forces are moving into a defensive formation. It appears they've detected the Tartarus activation and are preparing for engagement." Aileen frowned, gripping the rifle tighter. "Defensive? They're not attacking outright?" "No," Edward replied. "They're waiting, possibly trying to gauge your response before committing to an offensive." Clone 32 let out a bitter laugh as she loaded a magazine into her rifle. "So they're smarter than us. Great. We're walking into a fight we're not ready for against someone who actually knows what they're doing." "They might not attack first," Aileen said, more to herself than anyone else. Clone 32 glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "What, you think we can talk this out? You saw the warning shot. They're not rolling out the welcome mat." Aileen turned to Edward's holoscreen, which had blinked to life in the corner of the armory. "Is there any way to send them a message? Something to let them know we're not a threat?" Edward hesitated. "I can attempt to establish direct communication, but the odds of success are low. Their systems don't appear compatible with our own." "Try anyway," Aileen said firmly. Clone 32 rolled her eyes. "You're wasting time. Even if they answer, what are you going to say?" "Hi, we're here to take over your planet, but we promise to be nice about it." "They're going to shoot us either way." Aileen ignored her, focusing on Edward. "Do it." Edward's screen flickered as he began transmitting. A series of unintelligible symbols and sounds filled the room, static buzzing faintly in the background. "They're not responding," Edward said after a moment. "Their systems may not even recognize our transmission as communication." Clone 32 smirked, shaking her head. "Told you. You're better off focusing on how to survive this, not how to make friends." Another tremor rocked the ship, more violent than the last. The lights flickered and Aileen nearly lost her footing. Edward's voice returned, sharper now. "Incoming energy signatures. They're targeting critical systems. Defensive measures are activating automatically." Clone 32 was already moving, slinging a pack over her shoulder. "Looks like the time for talking is over." Aileen hesitated, her heart pounding. "We can't just go out there and start shooting. We don't even know what we're fighting." "We know enough," Clone 32 said bluntly. "They're shooting at us. That's all the intel I need." Aileen clenched her jaw, frustration bubbling under the surface. "This isn't a simple mission, okay? If we screw this up, we could start a war we can't win. And if we sit around waiting, will be dead before the war even starts." Clone 32 shot back. Edward interrupted before the argument could escalate further. "There's no time to debate. The unidentified forces are deploying additional units. They'll breach the ship's outer defenses in approximately 9 minutes. Aileen looked at Clone 32, who was already heading for the door. "Fine," she muttered, following reluctantly. "But if this goes sideways, it's on you." "Whatever helps you sleep at night," Clone 32 replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. The two moved through the dimly lit corridors of the ship, the tremors growing more frequent with each step. Aileen's mind raced as she tried to piece together a plan, but the truth was, she felt completely out of her depth. "Edward," she said finally, her voice tight, "what do we know about their weapons? Are they energy-based? Projectile?" "Energy-based," Edward replied. "High output, likely plasma or directed energy. Their firepower exceeds the ship's current defensive capabilities." Aileen's stomach churned. "Great. Anything else?" "There is one detail of note," Edward said. "Their attack patterns suggest a focus on disabling rather than destroying. They appear to be targeting your engines and comms rather than the ship's core or life support." Clone 32 snorted. "So they want to cripple us, not kill us. That's comforting." Aileen frowned. "Why would they do that?" "Possibly to capture the ship intact," Edward speculated, "or to interrogate its occupants." The thought sent a shiver down Aileen's spine. "We can't let that happen." "No kidding," Clone 32 said, glancing back at her. "That's why we need to take the fight to them before they get a chance to board." They reached the forward observation deck, where a reinforced blast window provided a clear view of the system ahead. Aileen's breath caught in her throat as she saw the distant shapes of the unidentified ships, sleek, angular designs glowing faintly with energy. "They're massive," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Clone 32 whistled low. "Yeah, no kidding. And there's more of them than I'd hoped." Edward's voice came over the intercom. "Their fleet consists of 6 vessels. 2 appear to be larger capital ships, while the remaining 4 are smaller escorts or fighters." Aileen's grip tightened on her rifle. "How are we supposed to fight that with what we've got?" "You're not," Edward replied bluntly. "Your best chance is to disable one of their vessels and use it as leverage to negotiate a ceasefire." Clone 32 laughed bitterly. "Negotiate? With what? Our winning personalities?" "Enough," Aileen snapped, turning to face her clone. "You're not helping." Clone 32 raised her hands in mock surrender. "Fine, lead the way, Captain. What's the plan?" Aileen took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "We need to buy time. If we can draw their attention away from the ship, we might be able to regroup and figure out our next move." "And how do you propose we do that?" Clone 32 asked, her tone skeptical. Aileen hesitated, her mind racing. "Edward, is Tartarus operational yet?" "Not fully," Edward replied. "The system is still in the final stages of activation. However, the gunship is nearing completion. It will be combat-ready in approximately 23 minutes. Clone 32 snorted. "We don't have 23 minutes. "Then we'll have to hold them off until it's ready," Aileen said firmly. Clone 32 smirked. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Stupid, but gutsy." Aileen ignored the comment, turning back to the observation window. The unidentified ships were getting closer, their glowing energy signatures casting an eerie light across the deck. "All right," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Let's give them a reason to think twice about messing with us." Aileen's heart pounded as the ship trembled under another barrage of fire. The lights flickered again, casting fleeting shadows across the deck. She gripped her rifle tightly, glancing at Clone 32, who was adjusting the scope on her weapon with calm efficiency. "Edward," Aileen said, her voice tense. "We need every ounce of power this ship has. Divert anything unnecessary to the defensive systems." "Already done," Edward replied. "Life support remains active, but all non-essential systems have been powered down. Shields are at 60% and holding, for now." "For now," Clone 32 muttered under her breath, her eyes fixed on the observation window. The enemy ships were growing larger as they approached, their glowing energy cores pulsating like hearts. Aileen could feel the weight of their presence, the crushing inevitability of what was coming.